This video is on domain and range. I'm going to be doing an example of a continuous graph with two endpoints. I'm going to be using blue highlighter to highlight the domain, the farthest left point and the farthest right point. I'm going to be using my pink highlighter to represent the range, the lowest y value and the highest y value. I will then write my numbers in the corresponding colors. I will use blue again for domain and pink for range. So our first example, we're going to look at a graph. Now we do have domain and range written out over here, but I'm going to show how these become this notation. This notation here that we already have written is set notation, and we're going to be writing it in another way as well. We are also going to be using interval notation. So we have some notes on here. Notice that this graph has two endpoints, so the graph starts and stops, and the domain covers all x values between the two endpoints because there's no gap. I can go from the left to the right of the graph of the actual line without having to pick up my pencil. Since the left and right endpoints are -7, -3, and 5, 1, the graph covers all x values between the x values of -7 and 5. Then we also have noticed that the first endpoint is a closed circle, so it includes that point, but the second endpoint is an open circle, so it does not include that point. Therefore, the graph covers all x values greater than or equal to -7 and all x values less than 5. We write that in interval notation as closed bracket -7, 5, open bracket. Now to show you what I mean with the picture with my highlight, so that we can easily see where the left point is, I will actually highlight the leftmost point of this graph. I'm going to highlight this closed circle in blue. Then I also need to highlight the rightmost point of the graph. So I look on the right hand side and find the furthest right point. I'm just going to highlight that in my blue. And again, I'm going to circle that because it's an open circle. Then, in my blue pen, I'm going to list out, since this is domain, the x value only of this. This is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This is at a -7. I'm going to write that number as -7 along the blue highlight. Then I'm going to list out the number of the farthest right. So that's positive 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Just the x value, because my blue is going to be in x's. Now, for domain, since this is a continuous graph and there is no gap between this blue highlight to the next blue highlight, I know that my first number in interval notation will be my -7, then my second number will be that positive 5. So we can write as -7, then 5. It actually tells me the order of the numbers as well, because this is my smallest number, this is my biggest number. So I know it will go from -7, 5, because it's listing every single x value, even the decimals, in between those two numbers. And we'll have that solid bracket, so that's a closed bracket on that -7 because the coordinate is closed. And on the 5, we're going to have an open bracket because it is an open circle. Now I'm also going to list this out in set notation, so I'm going to write a little note up here. This is set notation. This is written in set notation, but we like to put a little bit more to it. Because we're talking about the domain and because we're talking about the x's, I'm going to have my little squiggle bracket. I'm going to have x such that. Now I know for a fact I'm talking about my domain. Now, because I have the numbers in between, I have no infinity values. I know that my inequality for set notation is going to be between these two numbers. My -7 is my smallest and my 5 is my largest. So I put my -7, then I put my 5 on the far right. I know that all my values are going to be between these two numbers, so I will put my x in the middle. I know that I want all the numbers that were bigger than that -7, so I'm going to have my x is bigger than -7. I can also have it equal to that -7. because it was a closed circle on the graph. Then I also know that my points are smaller than that 5, so I'm going to make x less than 5. Now, it was an open circle on that 5, so I cannot put that equality aspect here. This is our set notation, and this will follow along with the interval notation. Because I know my -7 is my smallest, my 5 is my largest, and I know I want everything in between, so my comma separates them, saying to show that I want everything from the -7 to the 5, but just not including that 5. I can actually do the same thing for the range, so it'll say the same information down here, just talk about the range. So if I come back to the graph, I'm then going to use my pink to highlight for my range. So in my pink, I'm going to highlight my lowest y value, the lowest point on the graph, which happens to be this coordinate again. Then I want to highlight the highest point on the graph, which also happens to be this coordinate that I highlighted in blue earlier. So then I'm going to go back in my pink pen, and I'm going to list out the y value of this coordinate. So this is -1, 2, 3. I'm just going to list that -3. I can write this as a coordinate, but I do want to separate so I know which colors go with what, just because I like to color code this to help me see the numbers. So for this coordinate, the y value will be 1. Now, when I write my interval notation, I want to see if there's any gaps. So from the pink to the pink, I could keep my pencil on that paper the entire time, so there's no gaps. That means I can go from -3, because that's my smallest number, all the way up to that +1. So my interval notation will be written as -3 to +1. It was closed on the -3, and it was open on that +1. So I have a closed bracket on -3 and an open bracket on that 1. So for set notation, again, it's going to look similar to this. So for our set notation, it's going to be our squiggle bracket, because I'm opening up that bracket. I want the y's such that, again, since our interval notation told us that we had the -3 was the first, the 1 was our last, and we want everything in between, we'll write it out as our -3. We want the y's in between, and we want it to go to the 1. We want all the numbers that were larger than that -3, but also including that -3. So y is going to be greater than or equal to -3. But we want all the numbers less than 1, but not including the 1. So we just have less than 1. And then that is the end of our range. So for domain and range, when you have 2 endpoints, make sure that there are no gaps, and then you can write your interval notation as your left number, comma, your right number. That goes for both domain and range, because it's going from your smallest value to your largest value. So I'm going to make sure, the important note, to find the domain for a graph with 2 endpoints, always identify the x values of the point farthest to the left and the point farthest to the right. For the range, you want the y values of the lowest point and the highest point. This is if you have 2 endpoints, because it's going to be between those 2 values.